first column, where the Gemara says, in the middle of that paragraph, where we said we made a distinction. If a person goes ahead and he steals beams, he stole beams and put a beam for a sukkah, and he used it as beams for the sukkah. So we said the rabbis made a takana to make it easy for the person to repent. Like if the person steals beams and he puts it into his building, we say the rabbi said, even if the beams are 100% intact, and the Torah says you're supposed to return what you stole, and we said nevertheless the rabbis made it easy for the people to repent. They say that if you stole the beam, you don't have to return the beam itself. You have to go ahead and if you put it into the building, in your house. Good morning, Jaime.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're on 31A3. We say you would pay the money for the beam. And the Gemara says, so we give the same halacha if a person stole the beam and he put it in his house, but we don't require him to take apart his house to give back the actual beam. We said the same halacha applies to a sukkah. And we said that only applies to a sukkah during the 7 days of Sukkot, because that's like your house. It has a status like your house. But after the set, what do you want to say, Adam?
If returning the exact thing causes you to go like more.
Okay, so good. So it's a good question. What Adam's asking, we find a takana by beams in a building. What about if it's not a beam in a building? If it's some sort of movable item, which is not a beam, and somehow if I would have to return that item, it would cost so much. But so those halachas would have to be looked up. What would be in such a circumstance, right? But the Gemara says, but after Sukkot, where your building is not considered your house, you would have to take apart. Actually, so we see from there, you would actually take apart which time. It's time. It's your time that you would have to take apart the sukkah and give back the actual beam. But the Gemara says, that's what we left off yesterday. But the Gemara says, that's if you look at second paragraph on 31A3. We said, honey, mili bigav shiva. That's if you're in the middle of the 7 days of Sukkot. We don't require you to take apart the sukkah because it's kind of like your house. And therefore, just give back the value of the beams. But the shiva, after the holiday of Sukkot, then you got to take apart your sukkah and give back the actual beam. You have to give it back as is. Since if the beam wasn't altered, it wasn't changed, you didn't change the beam. But the Gemara says, but if the robber, the thief, attached the beam with some sort of cement, that makes it now more. By the way, I think your yarmulke fell off. Maybe that made it more permanent. Since it makes it more permanent, so then it's similar to your house, and therefore you will not need to go ahead and take apart your beam. I'm saying the original takana was by a beam, so we would have to look into the halacha. What other items would have the similar. Maybe I'll look up similar ramifications of a beam. You want to come here, Adam, so we can see you in the pictures. So they can hear your question. Come on, Adam. Come on up. Come on up. The price is right.
It's interesting.
Talk a little louder.
Can you hear me?
You talk a little louder. Don't be afraid to raise your voice. This is where you're allowed to raise your voice. Don't raise your voice when you get married. Don't raise your voice.
One interesting idea is I forgot what we said. I think that this actually has almost a bad effect because really like you only need the beams for the sukkah on Sukkot, right?
Right.
So like if I need to build my sukkah and somebody stole my beam and then he's gonna return it to me after Sukkot. Like, I don't want it anymore.
Right.
It's
No,
almost like it's useless
no.
now. So it's almost like afterwards, I actually would prefer the money. You know what I mean? Like I needed this beam only for Sukkot.
This you're going to get the money. So technically, you would get the money.
Got it. Okay.
But the other thing is, that's another point. If someone steals something from somebody, and yet you have the first thing you have to give back the item. That's the responsibility of the actual item. So if what happens, the guy says, I don't want the item back. I want you to give me the money. You have a right to give back the item. That's the item you stole. The fact the guy said, I'd rather have money now, that doesn't mean that you have to give him back the money. Because you give back what you stole.
Cemented into the Sukkah, I can't give it back to me. Now the price of the beam that I want to replace goes up in price.
Right. So it's right. Right. There's a lot of Gemaras that discuss these type of questions. What happens to the item when it goes up in price? But it's the same item. And what happens if the item goes down in price? Also, right. So there's a possibility that it could go both ways, right? The beam goes. What happens if the value of the beam goes down, and what happens if the beam goes up? So if the value goes up, so that if you give back the actual beam.
Beam back, but if I have to go buy one, it's $100 more.
Right. So there's a lot of Gemaras that discuss how do we deal with the inflation or deflation of the prices of an item once a person stole it. So now the Gemara continues. Tana. We're at the paragraph warning Adam. We have 31a. Tana. Now we're getting into a whole new Gemara. 31a3 on the first column. Now we're going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah stated that if a lulav, the Mishnah talks about something being dry, right? The name of the parak is lulav hagazul. So the first thing we spent a lot of time is discussing a lulav that was stolen. Now we're getting to the next case, yavesh. If a lulav is dry. So the Mishnah stated that if a lulav is dry, it is pasul. It is invalid. And of course, the halacha is going to discuss what is called dry. It's dry meaning that it's turned totally white. It's dry meaning that if you touch it, then it starts falling apart. The halacha will discuss exactly what's called dry. Obviously, if your lulav it has turned completely white, it has no moisture in it, no freshness, no yellow in it, then you're in big trouble. So the Gemara says, Tana, we learned in a Braita, yavesh pasul. We said that yavesh, if it's dry, it is pasul, but Rabbi Yehuda machshir. So here we have a dissenting opinion. Good morning. The dissenting opinion is Rabbi Yehuda says that is dry is kosher. That even though it turned white, the lulav is kosher. So now the Gemara wants to qualify this machlokes because the statement of the Braita is vague in its statement. It says yavesh pasul, dry is invalid, but it doesn't identify directly what item is this only referring to lulav? Is it referring to etrog as well? So comes Amar Rava. So Rava says machloket belulav. The argument is by lulav, specifically by lulav. And when it says lulav, it means lulav, hadassim, and aravot will be categorized as the same. So according to this opinion, it would be that if the aravot is dry, the hadassim are dry, it will be the same halacha like lulav. And we're going to see there's going to be other mishnayot later on that are going to discuss more about the hadassim. It's going to talk about hadassim. The next mishnah says if a hadas is dry, it is pasul. There's going to be another mishnah about hadassim being dry is pasul. So we're going to have mishnayot, and then we're going to have an arava that's dry as pasul. We're going to have, what do you say? Arava has a shorter life, and so they have to be extra careful with the Arava. But again, dry turns white, but usually Arava doesn't turn white. We'll have to see in the halacha what's called dry by Arava. Is it similar to the lulav, losing its green, turning colors, turning white? So okay, that's another thing. If it's certain, if, majority of the leaves fall off, that's another, that's another halacha. Even though it might not be dry, Simon. Let's say you go ahead and you have a beautiful, beautiful arava, green, fresh as anything, but you go ahead and you pull off the leaves. So even if it's a fresh arava, no having the leaves will make it invalid. So that would not be a disqualification because of being dry. It would be a disqualification because you don't have the leaves, right? It might not be dry. So falling off the leaves might not be a sign of, it might not invalidate, it might not disqualify because of dry. So here morning, Mark, we're now into a whole new discussion now. We're in a new discussion about dryness of a lulav and dryness of an etrog, and what's the halacha? Because we had on record in the Mishnah is it's interesting that the Mishnah only talks about lulav being dry. It would be invalid. That's what the Mishnah states. And we have another Mishnah that says that if the Arava is going to be dry, it's invalid. And another Mishnah that's going to say Aravot that's dry and valid. I presume we'll have a Mishnah that will say Etrog dry and valid. But we have clearly on record when our Mishnah, for our purposes, our Mishnah only stated lulav that's dry is invalid, and does not bring anyone that argues on this point in the Mishnah. But the Breita, which is also a similar time period of the Mishnah, they bring a dissenting opinion. And they bring the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda says that a dried lulav is kosher. And now the Gemara wants to understand, is focusing on Rabbi Yehuda. What does Rabbi Yehuda hold about an etrog? He goes on record and he says that a dried lulav is good, which would mean that dry hadassim and aravot will be good, according to Rabbi Yehuda. But what does he say about etrog? Is etrog in its own category? Does etrog stand that if the etrog is dry, it's no good, that everybody would agree it's no good? Or is etrog have the same law as lulav? So that's what the Gemara is coming to say. Omar Rava, so comes Rava, the later rabbi, in the later period, the Amoraim period, he says, Machloket b'lulav. The argument Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda says that it can be, if it's dry, it's kosher. Now, by the way, the fact that it's kosher doesn't mean you're doing it the right way, the ideal way you're supposed to do it. Of course, you're supposed to beautify a mitzvah. And if you do a mitzvah and it's dry, you're not beautifying the mitzvah. But the question is, you get credit for the mitzvah. So Rabbi Yehuda says you got credit for the mitzvah. Yehuda Mashiach, Amar Rav, Machloket b'lulav. The Rabbanan Savri Makshinan lulav le'etrog. Rabbanan hold that we compare, there's a hekish of lulav to etrog. That means the Torah in the same pasuk, the Torah says, Kachtem lachem b'yom harishon, pre-eitz hadar, kapot tumarim, anav avot avinachal. So the Torah talks about taking a pre-eitz hadar, where the Gemara now is translating hadar means hadar, beautiful. Like hidur, beautifying something. Mahadrin, right? We're going to have a Hanukkah. There's mahadrin mina mahadrin, right? Technically the Gemara is going to say that on a basic level, a person can fulfill his obligation, menorah, one candle, every night, one candle. That would be the first level of the basic obligation of menorah is one candle for night number 1, and one candle for night number 2, one candle for night number 3, and so on and so on. That's the basic obligation. But the Gemara concludes that hamahadrin min hamahadrin, the people that beautify at the highest level of beauty, the Gemara identifies there are 3 levels. There's the basic level, level number 2, and then the highest level, we'll call level number 3. That's when you have a candle each night and you add each night a candle. And then by the time you get to the night number 8, you got 8 candles in the night number 8. It's interesting, a difference in opinion between Sfardim and Ashkenazim. Is it all that every member of the household has to have that Hanukkah menorah, or just one menorah that has the 8 candles by the end of the night? That depends on whatever whatever the custom is. But there's something called the Gemara called, what did you say? The Sfardim, the basic minhag of the Sfardim is that they do one menorah for the house. That's the basic minhag for I would say most Sfardim. That's what I would think. But the Gemara refers to mahadrin menam mahadrin, and it's an amazing thing that is the custom of the Jewish people, that all the Jewish people have that custom, and therefore that needs to be done that way, to do the menorah in such a high level, beautiful way. Right, so very good. So that's what the Gemara is going to have a whole discussion. How do you know Bri'etz Hadam means etrog? It just says beautiful, take a beautiful fruit. So that's we have to stay tuned to the Gemara. The Gemara have to identify, how do you know Bri'etz Hadam means, how do we know it means an etrog? So the Gemara, but it says when the Torah writes the idea of beauty, in that pasuk, it said on the way we're translating Hadar as beauty, it's written on the etrog. So now the question is, do we compare the other members of that pasuk, the other members of the lulav, the hadassim, the aravot, and the lulav, to the etrog? Do we say just like the etrog has to be beautiful, and therefore and the Torah is calling here beautiful a basic identification of the mitzvah. So in contrast to other mitzvot, the guy goes ahead and he builds a sukkah, and the sukkah is not beautiful. You build a sukkah, it's not beautiful. The Torah didn't tell you, when they identified the mitzvah, make a beautiful sukkah. Just make a sukkah. So technically you get credit for the mitzvah of sukkah, even if it's not a beautiful sukkah. But you missed out on the mitzvah of beautifying it, right? Like that says, if the Torah says write a mezuzah, so if you go ahead and you buy a beautiful mezuzah, you beautify the mitzvah. But if the writing of the person is sloppy, but all the halachos are followed, but he doesn't have a neat handwriting, you get credit for the mitzvah. But here the Torah goes out of its way and says, I want it to be bri'etz hadar. I want it to be beautiful. So therefore, you have to, if it's not beautiful, and what we'll have to identify what's called not beautiful. Once it's not that level, then it's invalid. Which the Gemara is now using beautiful to the idea if it's dried out, it's not beautiful. And therefore, the Gemara is saying the argument between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda is, do we compare the other species, the other 3, to the etrog? So Rabbi Yehuda says, according to Rava, only the etrog has to be beautiful. The other items, you can fulfill your obligation without it being beautiful. We don't compare it to the etrog. That's what the Gemara wants to say. Ma etrog. Rabbanan savri makshinan lulav etrog. The Rabbanan hold you compare lulav to etrog. Ma etrog boy hadar. Just etrog has to be beautiful. Af lulav boy hadar. Also lulav has to be beautiful. If Yehuda says lo makshinan lulav etrog. We don't compare lulav to etrog. Over be'etrog divrei hakol hadabina. Everybody holds that you need hadar when it comes to etrog. So now, and by the way, the Gemara later on, we're going to see the Gemara itself is going to even challenge this idea to say that everybody holds etrog needs hadar, because we're going to see maybe they might translate the pasuk hadar differently. So now the Gemara says, "Ubalulav lo goy Rabbi Yehuda hadar." The Gemara is now asking the following question: does Rabbi Yehuda do not require hadar in lulav? We have a Mishnah. Vatanan. We learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda omer yagdenu mulmayla. Rabbi Yehuda says if you have a lulav and the leaves of the lulav are starting to separate, right? Instead of looking like one straight lulav, like a nice lulav looks, it starts the leaves are starting to split, separate from the, from instead of staying nicely tied nicely by the spine, separate. So what did Yehuda say in our Mishnah? That you have to tie it. He says you must tie it on top. You must tie the lulav on top, that it should not look like it's separating. It should be united. So the Gemara says, why do you have to tie it? So the Gemara is thinking, well, probably it's because if the lulav starts going like this, it's not beautiful. It's beautiful when the lulav is all, when all the leaves are one, are uniform. So the Gemara says, "Lav my time, isn't it because he requires hadar?" So we see that he does require hadar. So now we have a contradiction to what we said before. We understood the way Rava explained. Rava explained Rabbi Yehuda's position that dried out is invalid, is because the problem is that if it's dry, it's not beautiful. That's what Rava explained. The problem of a lulav that's dry, why is it disqualified? Why is a dry lulav disqualified? Not because a dry lulav is not a lulav. The dried lulav is disqualified specifically because it's not beautiful. That's how Rava explained the problem. Why it's disqualified. If that's the case, so why is it that Rabbi Yehuda says you have to tie it on top? Doesn't it seem to be that Rabbi Yehuda holds that it has to be beautiful? And perhaps there's some other reason why dried out is disqualified. Don't tell me, Rava, you're telling me the reason why disqualified lulav is because Rabbi Yehuda says that a dried lulav is kosher, because Rabbi Yehuda holds you do not need that has to be beautiful. That's not true. Rabbi Yehuda says that it needs to be beautiful. So maybe there's another reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that it's kosher. So that's the Gemara's challenge. So the Gemara says, isn't it because he needs it to be beautiful, and therefore you can't tell me Rabbi Yehuda holds he doesn't need to be beautiful. So the Gemara says, so there has to be some other explanation why Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher by a dried out lulav. So the Gemara says, lo. The Gemara says the reason Rabbi Yehuda that he says it has to go ahead and tie it on top, really, Rabbi Yehuda holds that there's no requirement for the lulav to be beautiful. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says that if the lulav is dried out, it's still kosher. It's a lulav, it's dried out, it's not the most beautiful, but it doesn't have to be beautiful. So why does he say that you have to go ahead and tie it on top? Isn't it because of beautification purposes? So the says, no, there's a different reason. There's a special word in the pasuk that teaches us that a lulav according to Rabbi Yehuda, that the stuff has to be tied together. That it can't be that you have pieces of the lulav going in different directions. No, to itself. That the lulav itself, that the leaves of the lulav, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that the leaves of the lulav have to be like united, one. Not that it could be separate. And therefore, meaning, if it wouldn't be for that special law by lulav, it doesn't have to be beautiful. There's no requirement in order to you fulfill the mitzvah. It has to be beautiful. But there's a special law over here that it has to be tied together. Not necessarily because of beautiful, not because it's from another source, not because of beautiful. If it needs to be beautiful, if it's because of beautiful, I don't need a separate source to tell me it has to be tied together. If it has to be beautiful, that's why it can't be going in those directions. The reason why, the fact that he says he has a different source, that's why it's a special requirement by the lulav, which we don't have there's no tying together unified hadassim and aravot, so there's no mitzvah of tying it together there. There's no tying over there, and technically the hadassim, the aravot, if they're dry, they would also be good. Rabbi Yehuda would say dried out hadassim, dried out aravot, dried out lulav. If the lulav stays united, even though it's good. No, according to Rabbi Yehuda. I mean, the Mishnah says all the Mishnayot say if it's dry, it's no good. I mean, the Chachamim, which is the more majority opinion, not like Rabbi Yehuda is a minority opinion. They hold dried out hadas no good, dried out rabas good, dried out lulav no good. But here we're focusing on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Because Rabbi Yehuda went on record and he said a dried out lulav is good. So we're trying to understand what's his reasoning. So the Gemara says, Kedetani Taima. Like the reason is given. We are on 31A3. 31A3 on the right column, middle of the page. The Gemara says, Lo Kedetani Taima. There's a special reason why it has to be tied by the lulav. Kapot, why? And if it's tied and if it's dry, morning everybody, morning, it's still good. Why? Kapot tumarim. It says kapot tumarim, and we read it as if kapot. We read it as if it says kafut. Kafut means to be tied. So the Torah has no nikudot in the Torah, doesn't vowelize, and sometimes it's written in a certain way that you could go ahead and read it different ways to teach us different ideas. So kafut, that means it has to be connected, tied. Which teaches us if the leaves are separating, going different directions, you have to tie it together. So that's why the Gemara at this point, the Gemara defends Rava's position. So it comes out Rava's explaining Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbi Yehuda's the law, but Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is dried out lulav is kosher, but you don't need it to be beautiful. No, not like Gemara saying Rabbi Yehuda holds it doesn't need to be beautiful, and therefore that's why it's kosher if it's dry. But there's a special halacha that you have to that the lulav has to be going in one direction. The lulav can't be going, the leaves can't be going, because when the Torah tells us about a lulav, and it identifies that palm branch, it talks about it being, it says it in a way that it indicates that it has to be tied together.
Together, that means to be somewhat dry.
Yeah, but he's saying you can have a dry lulav, a white lulav, turned white. It's good. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. What? As long as it's tied, right? It's all about all right. The tying is the key. And by the way, you should know. Right, everyone has to be tied. Right. And but no. If it all needs to be according to Rabbi Yehuda, it only needs to be tied if it's the leaves are going the wrong way. If it's staying normal, it doesn't make it. You can have a moist one going, the leaves are going the wrong way. You have a non-moist one. There's a special halacha. The lulav has to be if it's going the way, it has to be like together. Now, what is the idea about this? I just want to share an idea for a second. There's a midrash that says that what's the idea? Why does Hashem tell us to take a lulav right after Yom Kippur? Right, we have the mitzvah of lulav hadasim and aravot following Yom Kippur. So one idea is that the lulav represents when people would go to war in victory, they would carry something maybe this type of thing, showing we're victorious. It's a sign of winning. So the lulav is like a sign of we won the war, and maybe that type and the way it was done, that type of item was done in a way that it was uniform. It wasn't that type of thing that was going in different directions. So maybe that's perhaps connected to the idea why Rabbi Yehuda, why it would be that it should be looking like that's how you would go out, not with something that's going, the leaves are going in a different direction. So what were you saying, Adam? Has nothing to do with dry. Has nothing to do with dry. Has nothing to do with beautiful. It's a separate halacha that you have to like this. The way we're explaining this victory sign. A victory sign has to be in a certain fashion. If it's not in that fashion, it's not a victory sign. I mean, if you want, just give me an idea to maybe give a little embellishment to perhaps something.
One that's not going to-
You don't need a tie. Right. Exactly. Right. That's the point. Right. So now the Gemara says. Now the Gemara challenges from another area. Velo, we're saying Rabbi Yehuda doesn't require hadar. That's what we said. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It could be dried. Again, we said it's not ideal. It could be dry. Velo by hadar. He doesn't need that it should be beautiful. Vatnan. We have a Mishnah later on. When you tie the aravot and the hadassim to the lulav, right? What do you use to tie it? You use from the palm leaf, from the lulav thing itself. And so now we learned in the Mishnah, Ein ogdin et lulav, ela b'mino. You're only going to have you use when you tie the hadassim, the aravot to the lulav, you use the things that come from the lulav itself, like the leaf of the lulav. You can't use something else. That's the opinion, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's the opinion of Yehuda. You want to tie hadassim and aravot together onto lulav, you have to tie it with the piece of the lulav itself. So my timer, why is it that you have to use the piece of the lulav itself? Why can't I use a rubber band to tie my hadassim and the aravot, or a piece of string to tie my hadassim? Do the same trick, right? You want to tie it, use string to tie something. So why can't I use string? So morning. So what does he say? The Gemara is thinking lav mishum de hadar. Isn't it needs to be beautiful? And when you do something when the colors are the same, that's beautiful. Something similar colors. But if you go ahead and you start using different color, and outside, the white doesn't fit in so well. The white string or that rubber band doesn't fit with the decor of the lulav. It's not as beautiful. So the Gemara is thinking that's why that it's disqualified, and therefore the Gemara wants to suggest that we see Rabbi Yehuda holds it does need to be beautiful. Why is he so particular about the type that it has to be from the palm, from the leaf, or from the species, from the lulav species? Why does it require from the lulav species to use to tie it? So the Gemara is thinking, a lot of times in life you think something, and at the end it's something else. But the Gemara is thinking that the reason for that is because this principle calls hadar, of beautifying the lulav. So and therefore we see that Yehuda requires you have to beautify the lulav. So the Gemara said, "Lo, that's not the reason. There's a different reason why it has to be from the same species." And the Gemara proves, because the Gemara is going to prove that it's not because of color that it has to be the same color, because you can even use other parts of the lulav where the lulav comes from, the bark of the tree, or other things of the ivy of the lulav tree. You could use that to tie. The Gemara says, "Lo, it's not because of beautification purposes, because the Hama Rava, because Rava says that Rabbi Yehuda holds afilu b'siv. You can even bundle the lulav with the ivy that grows around the tree, around the trunk of the tree. Afilu b'ikara de dikla. Even with stripped pieces from the bark of the tree, you could go ahead and tie it. So therefore, that's not going to look beautiful. That's what is that? A nice dark color on a nice green lulav. So what's the reason for Rabbi Yehuda? Why does he say that you have to tie it with something that comes from the tree, from the species of the lulav? Because of a different reason. Because by time of Rabbi Yehuda Savah, lulav sarach again. Lulav, you have to tie that he holds. You have to tie that dasim and the rubber together. By the way, we hold our custom is to tie that dasim and the rubber to the lulav to beautify for beautification purposes. Rabbi Yehuda says it's more than just beautification purposes. It's a basic obligation in the lulav that you have to have the dasim and the aravot tied to the lulav. If it has to be tied to the lulav, if you're going to bring some other item, you're going to bring string, rubber band to tie the hadas aravot, that's like you have a fifth thing together. It's like you have, the Torah says you do arba minim, 4, not 5. There's something called baltosif. we'll consider it still part, but that's not considered first species. Walk it's still from the family. It's still from it's from the lulav. So therefore, it's not considered that you're adding to the mitzvah. Like the Torah says you have. So that's the reason. His reason is the only reason why you have to tie it with something from the tree is not for beautification purposes. The bark is not beautification, but you could use the bark because the bark of the tree is considered like the tree itself, and therefore, it's not like you brought in a new species. Not like you brought an apple. No, but he's saying ivy is part ivy of the tree. He says it is the ivy that grows around the trunk. But the fact that it grows around it, we consider it. It's not. We don't look at it as a separate thing. That's what the Gemara says. But at the end of the day, when we do mitzvot, we always have a special halakha. Even though many mitzvot can be done not in the beautiful fashion, we still get credit. We still have a special mitzvah to beautify. Not to go into a store and say, "What's the cheapest mitzvah?" I want to buy the cheap. As long as it's kosher, I want the cheapest mitzvah. That's not. You might get credit for the mitzvah mitzvah, but you did not get credit for the mitzvah of beautifying a mitzvah. I want to wish the inside, but even the casing also is a beautification. It's not the same level of beautification, but we have halachot. A nice case for a Megillah case beautifies the Megillah. An etrog box beautifies the mitzvah. There are even on the casing, but the inside is more important. But the casing is also something that makes that it adds to the beauty of the mitzvah. I want to wish everyone a beautiful day, and we should have also a beautiful davening, not just a davening, not just to pray, but it's be hidur, a davening with right, Rabbi Yaakov, a davening with hidur. That's what we should go ahead, and that's beautiful, and Hashem will be very happy. Have a great day, everybody. So now we're in a total new focus now in the Gemara. No more crooks in the Gemara. No more people stealing who love him. But now, nobody more stealing who love him. Have a great day, everybody. Jaime, have a great day. Thank you, everybody. Adam, welcome back. And I want to welcome Rabbi Yaakov to coming to sitting at the class. It's our honor to have you. Thank you. Aaron, and welcome back.